Did you know that Jerusalem, the most famous city in the Bible, was once a place of fierce resistance against God's people? The Jebusites, the original inhabitants of this impenetrable fortress called Jebus, defied divine promises and made their mark on history with their boldness. But what happened to them? How did David manage to conquer the impossible and transform Jebus into the iconic city of David? Stay with me, because in this video we're going to reveal the shocking secrets of a mysterious people, understand how archaeology confirms the Bible, and discover what the Jebusites still have to teach us about our spiritual journey. You won't believe the hidden lessons of this millennia-old story. The Jebusites, frequently mentioned in the pages of the Bible, were one of the Canaanite peoples who inhabited the Promised Land before the Israelite conquest. Their origins trace back to Canaan, the son of Ham, as described in Genesis 10:15 through 16, where they are listed among the descendants of Canaan alongside other peoples such as the Hittites, Amorites, and Girgashites. These groups shared a common origin, but the Jebusites stand out for their role in the history of Jerusalem and their resistance to God's promises to Israel. The Bible often presents the Jebusites as a symbol of resistance against divine plans. In Exodus 3:8, God declares his intention to deliver the Israelites from Egypt and bring them to a good and spacious land, inhabited by peoples such as the Jebusites. In Deuteronomy 7:1, they are listed among the nations the Israelites were commanded to defeat to fulfill the promise made to Abraham. This alliance between the Jebusites and other Canaanite peoples made them a significant obstacle to God's plan. The Jebusites had close yet often conflict-ridden relationships with other Canaanite tribes. Sharing similar cultural and religious practices, they often joined forces against the Israelites while maintaining their own unique identity. This connection is reflected in the Israelites' spiritual and physical strategies for defeating these nations and consolidating their hold on the Promised Land. Thus, the Jebusites represent both a military challenge and a provocation to Israel's spiritual fidelity. Jebus, the city that would later become Jerusalem, was a strategic and enigmatic fortress located at one of the highest points in ancient Canaan. Its privileged geographical position, perched atop hills and surrounded by deep valleys such as the Kidron Valley, made it an almost impregnable city. This natural fortification was enhanced by the robust walls built by the Jebusites to consolidate their defense. In 2 Samuel 5:6-7, the Bible describes how the city, in its arrogance, considered itself invulnerable, even mocking the possibility of being conquered. The structure of Jebus reflected the spirit of the Jebusites, determined, proud, and confident in their strength. Its walls were not merely physical barriers, but also a symbol of spiritual resistance. This belief in invincibility can be seen as an echo of humanity's struggle against God's designs. Jebus was not only a strategic location, but also a place imbued with profound spiritual significance, representing a challenge to God's purposes in the Promised Land. In addition to its defensive architecture, Jebus was revered for its sacred importance. From ancient times, its location was associated with significant spiritual and theological events. This symbolism would continue to shape its identity after David's conquest, transforming it into the Jerusalem we know today. God's choice of this location, even while it was under Jebusite control, demonstrates how even the most resistant places to his purposes can be redeemed. The conflicts between the Jebusites and the Israelites trace back to God's promises to Abraham. In Genesis 15:18-21, the Lord revealed to Abraham that the land inhabited by peoples like the Jebusites would be given to his descendants. This promise, however, would not be fulfilled without resistance. The Jebusites, firmly established in Jebus and allied with other Canaanite peoples, became a symbol of opposition to divine plans, challenging Israel's faithfulness and perseverance. One of the most notable episodes of this resistance is recorded in Judges 1:21. Despite their military strength, the Benjamites failed to drive the Jebusites out of Jerusalem. This failure illustrates a recurring pattern in Israel's battles, the inability to fully trust in God's promises and completely eliminate pagan influences. The coexistence of Israelites and Jebusites led to cultural and spiritual conflicts, posing challenges to the purity of worshipping God. However, the Jebusites were not merely military adversaries, they also represented a spiritual threat. Their religious practices, deeply rooted in pagan beliefs, stood in stark contrast to the exclusive worship of God required of Israel. The continued presence of the Jebusites in the Promised Land symbolized not only physical resistance, but also the spiritual struggle against influences that drew Israel away from their divine calling. David's conquest of Jerusalem is one of the most strategically and spiritually significant events in Israel's history. In 2 Samuel 5:6-9, the Bible recounts how David, newly anointed as king over all Israel, approached Jebus with a bold and unexpected plan. The Jebusites, confident in their fortifications, mocked David, arrogantly declaring that even the blind and lame could defend the city, believing it to be impregnable. This taunt only strengthened David's resolve. With a strategy that combined military intelligence and trust in God, David identified a weakness in the Jebusite stronghold: the water tunnels. He ordered his men to climb through the underground tunnels, infiltrating the city from a point the Jebusites would never anticipate. This move not only secured victory, but also highlighted the importance of trusting God's promises and acting with divine wisdom. The phrase, "the blind and the lame shall not come into the house," became a testament to how human arrogance is overcome by God's sovereignty. After the conquest, David transformed Jebus into Jerusalem, the city of David. More than a military achievement, this transformation symbolized the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham and the consolidation of Israel's kingdom. Jerusalem became not only Israel's political capital, but also its spiritual center, where the temple of God would later be built. This change demonstrated God's power to redeem even the most resistant places for His purposes. The Jebusites are shrouded in mysteries that encompass their culture and religious practices. Inhabiting Jebus, they were known for their devotion to pagan gods, reflecting the idolatry common among the Canaanite peoples. These practices, indirectly mentioned in various biblical texts, suggest a worship system centered on rituals and sacrifices that stood in stark opposition to the spiritual purity commanded by God. Such idolatry made the Jebusites not only a military obstacle, but also a spiritual challenge to Israel's faithfulness. The Jebusite influence on Israelite culture remains a topic of debate among scholars and theologians. In certain passages, hints of temporary alliances or even peaceful coexistence between the Jebusites and Israelites appear, as suggested in Judges 1:21. However, this coexistence carried spiritual risks, exposing Israel to the temptation of adopting pagan practices and drifting from the exclusive worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Another intriguing question concerns the eventual disappearance of the Jebusites. While there is no detailed record of their assimilation or destruction, it is believed that their culture and lineage were absorbed into the Israelite community and other neighboring peoples following the conquest of Jerusalem. The Bible provides only glimpses of their fate, leaving room for interpretation about how God dealt with this people who symbolized spiritual resistance. Throughout Scripture, the Jebusites emerge as a powerful symbol of spiritual resistance against God's purposes. Representing human obstinacy, they inhabited the fortress of Jebus, a place that seemed impenetrable both physically and spiritually. This resistance, however, was overcome by David's determination and, most importantly, by the fulfillment of God's promises. In 2 Samuel 5:6-9, the conquest of Jebus stands as more than a military victory. It is a testimony to God's sovereignty over any stronghold of resistance. Spiritually, the Jebusites can be likened to the challenges and obstacles we face in our Christian journey. Just as David confronted the Jebusite walls with faith and divine strategy, we are called to trust God to tear down barriers that seem insurmountable. Jebus, once a symbol of opposition, was transformed into Jerusalem, the holy city, demonstrating that God can redeem even the most challenging places and situations to fulfill his purposes. David's triumph also marks God's faithfulness to his promises. The transformation of Jebus into Jerusalem reflects the victory of God's kingdom over human pride and idolatry. This event highlights the importance of persevering in faith even when circumstances appear impossible. It serves as a reminder that victory is not achieved through human strength, but through God's power at work. The Jebusites, despite their prominent role in biblical history, remain an enigma to archaeologists and historians. Excavations in Jerusalem, ancient Jebus, have uncovered structures that attest to this people's sophistication and advanced engineering. Among the most significant discoveries are water tunnel systems, such as the Siloam Tunnel, which may have been strategically used during David's conquest, as mentioned in 2 Samuel 5:6-9. These findings confirm the biblical description of Jebus as a fortified and seemingly impenetrable city. Another fascinating aspect of biblical archaeology regarding the Jebusites is the lack of clear references to their culture after David's conquest. Fragments of pottery, weapons, and architectural remains point to a civilization that was gradually assimilated into Israelite society or disappeared due to cultural integration and transformation. This absence of solid records deepens the mystery of who the Jebusites truly were and how they contributed to Jerusalem's identity. Modern theories suggest that the Jebusites may have had a significant influence on Israel's early culture, particularly in architecture and possibly in administrative practices. However, any direct trace of their identity was overshadowed by Jerusalem's centrality as the city of God and the site of the temple. This transition, powerfully narrated in the Bible, symbolizes how God transforms opposition into opportunity, a theme echoed in the archaeological discoveries that bear witness to his intervention in history. The Jebusites, though seemingly forgotten by history, raise a fascinating question. Could they still exist in some form, whether through descendants or cultural impact? There are no clear records of their lineage after the conquest of Jebus, but it is possible that they were assimilated into the Israelite tribes or other peoples over the centuries. The Bible provides no definitive details, which only deepens the mystery surrounding this people's legacy. One intriguing curiosity is how Jerusalem, the former Jebus, continued to serve as a focal point of spiritual and historical events. From the days of David to the time of Jesus and beyond, the city has maintained its position as the spiritual heart of Israel. This fact highlights the divine transformation the city underwent, from a fortress of resistance to a center of worship of the Most High God. Additionally, prophetic interpretations suggest that Jerusalem's history, including its roots as Jebus, carries apocalyptic significance. Passages such as Zechariah 12:2-3, which describe Jerusalem as a cup of trembling for the nations, underscore the city's ongoing importance in God's plans. It is possible that the ancient site of Jebus holds symbolic meaning in the future events described in prophecy. These final mysteries about the Jebusites and their city illustrate how biblical history is filled with profound and yet to be discovered meanings. The journey from Jebus to Jerusalem is not just a historical account, but also a metaphor for redemption and divine sovereignty, serving as an eternal reminder that God transforms resistance into victory and opposition into worship. If you're fascinated by the secrets behind the conquest of Jerusalem and how God turned an impenetrable fortress into his dwelling place, don't miss the upcoming videos. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications to continue exploring incredible Bible stories that will transform your understanding of faith and Christian history. Let's discover more together.